Okay. And you're able to access the YouTube link, right?
Me?
Yeah, I just sent it to you.
You did?
Mm-hmm. Via the chat.
Okay, and that's because people will be watching there. You mean to look for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I might ask Erica to do that because I think she's coming on.
Okay.
Because I won't be able to look at both places.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll just message her and ask her. Is there a Zoom link? Oh yeah, I'll ask Rhoda because she just asked me. I'll say, please watch on YouTube.
Okay, perfect. So I will start letting people in now.
Why am I hearing myself?
One second.
That was funny.
Hi, welcome everyone to Bridging the Atlantic. I'm just gonna leave a little bit of room for everyone to join on before we get started. Okay, so welcome to our next episode of Bridging the Atlantic. I'm really, really excited for this one where we're going to be talking about Black art and creating that Black diaspora visually. I'm really excited to be joined by Michael Ahajuru, where we're going to be talking about the Black presence in art. Really quickly, I just wanted to kind of briefly explain the series, what the purpose is, and also welcome you to this next installment. So Bridging the Atlantic is a weeks-long series where different conversations will be held every single week, kind of discussing what Blackness is, what is its relevance in the modern day in different capacities. So we've gone over Black art, we've looked at Black activism, and you can check out those previous showings that we've had on our YouTube site, Bridging the Atlantic, as well as following the BCA on Twitter and on Instagram. As I said today, we're joined by Michael Ahajuru. I'm Deja Brabham, so I'm going to be also a part of the series, a part of this session as well, kind of giving my thoughts on how Blackness has been visualized. But first, I want to introduce Michael. So Michael Ahajuru was a successful senior executive in the mobile communications industry before retiring in February of 2013 to carry out voluntary work in the arts and for the Black community. Born in Liverpool, England, he holds an honors degree in physics and art history. He's also an arts blogger who specializes in Black African presence in Renaissance Europe, in particular, the Black Magus and Adorations images from the period. He regularly writes on these matters and also speaks on those themes at the V&A, the British Library, and other institutions. And he is currently working with the Institute of Commonwealth Studies to run a series of workshops around the theme, what's happening in Black British history. He also runs tours at the National Gallery, which I had the honor of being able to attend in December. I'm really, really excited to have you here. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for that introduction. But I always get embarrassed when I hear myself described like that. No, but thank you so much.
And so I guess to just start us off, again, we're going to be talking today about Black art and specifically how Blackness has been visualized throughout different time periods. You specialize in this area. When you talk about Black presence in art, what are you referring to?
Well, I tend to see it as a journey in time. And I really look at it two ways, both from a kind of a physical presence and a temporal presence in time, moving through time, because I'm interested in Western European canonical art. And let me go a bit further. And this is it's always challenging when I say this. It's white European canonical art. I go even further, and I have to say it's white male European canonical art. I had the white male. That's been doing my tours now for about 3 years now. And it's occurred to me as I've been doing these tours in the galleries in London, the nucleus of these galleries, the kernel of the collections, are all from white men, from property owning white men, often with some connection with slavery. So we're looking at art which they purchased, and they viewed life through their lens. They saw the world as they collected stuff that they liked, that reflected the world as they see it. And then when you got the canonical art, they defined what was great art. They defined culture, in terms of the artists they collected and the interpretation those artists gave from the understanding of the classics and the scriptures. So it's very much reflection. That's at the kernel of how I see it about art. So we go on two journeys, as I say, from physical presence in terms of. I think I sent you a slide. Perhaps you could show us that first slide. That'd be useful now. It could help me kind of collect my thoughts. Oops. Yeah, this one here. Can we make it bigger? That's good. I talk about a kind of journey from objects of economic capital to creators of cultural capital. Now, on the left there, we've got Hogarth, William Hogarth, the 17th century painting. This is the height of the slave trade, where Black people were, for the main part, they were slaves. There were many free men. Don't get me wrong, there were many free men, but the majority were slaves or they were servants. They served some capacity, there's some servile capacity to the white presence in the painting. And here we have a typical Black presence, which is seen on the edge, which is peripheral to the painting, is incidental. When you see the bigger painting, because this is a detail, you see serving this woman who's having an affair or trying to talk to a man next door. And so the Black presence is marginal. And I show you this one because it's really interesting in the sense that Hogarth was a great portrait painter. He understood the human figure, but he paints the Black person here in quite a grotesque way. And he's using the Black presence specifically to kind of mock the people in the painting. The fact that the Black presence in this painting has a specific purpose, in the sense that Black presence, he is mocking the white people because they're living a decadent life. Because Hogarth didn't like the decadence that this white woman portrayed. He didn't like the fact that she was a symbol of the nouveau riche that was happening at the time. The wealth was, people were making money out of slavery and other activities. They were taking ideas in from Europe and all the things he literally detested. He would have been, in his day, his nickname was Britophile, and he would have been a kind of a Nigel Farage character, very right-wing, reactionary, very nationalistic British character. And he's using the Black figure to mock the white figures here, because the Black figure he saw as even the noble savage has morals and standards that are above yours, the white people there. So he's using the Black figure to denigrate the white figures in this circumstance. But nevertheless, at the same time, the white figure is a subservient figure to the white presence in the painting. So that's where we have the Black presence as an object of subjective economic capital. Now, if we move forward to today, this is where we have artists of color creating art, creating cultural capital. They're creating work that reflects their times, helps us understand our times, helps us understand who we are and how we fit into the world. These are artists in their own right. They're not on the one, and I even go further, they're not Black artists, they're not white artists, they're artists. Now, some Black artists do choose to talk about the Black position. Others, like this, like Ron Moody here, this is from the 1930s. He wants to talk about this painting, Joanne. This is a sculpture. It's a sculpture. It's a beautiful, monumental sculpture. And this is where photographs fail in sculptures to me, because the painting is about 5 foot high. It's about the same size as me. It's quite big. It's cut out of one piece of elm. And he's used the elm, the elm wood, to create things like the belly button there. You can see how he's crafted that in here. And he's created this image here of a kind of a monumental stillness, kind of an introspective piece, a piece that at the same time, if you look at those arms, there's some tension there. Those arms, there's something in there that wants to come out. And I love this sense of something held back that wants to come out. Ronald Moody, he talks about, he was inspired by a visit to the British Museum when he saw the Egyptian sculptures, those huge pictures, huge images of the Sphinx and pharaohs, which stood there in a quiet stillness that had a kind of a presence all of its own, that stillness it created. And he wanted to create that in his works. And he comes out, he was, as I say, he came out a very changed man from to the British Museum, and he creates this painting here, the sculpture here, which kind of helps us understand that stillness, that in the quiet monumentality. So when you look at this work, and again, the photograph doesn't do it justice, it looks at you looking at it. It has a presence all of its own. So that's what I talk about as an artist of color. And I should have said who he is. He's a Jamaican artist. He came over in the 30s to study medicine, and I think he graduated, but he never practiced medicine. He became a sculptor. He comes from quite a well-known family. Some of you may, Harold Moody, his brother was the League of Colored People here in England. He formed a movement to give people rights, to black people rights. And so he came from quite a successful family. And I think his brother was also a fighter pilot. So the three brothers were very successful in their own right. But he created this work, these works in wood. So I use this as an example of how we see the Black presence moving from objects of economic capital to finally to creating cultural capital, helping us understand our times. And you see, there's two types of physical presence. One, there's an explicit presence, like in the Hogarth, you can see it very clearly. And then there's an implicit presence. You would not know that this sculpture here was done by an artist of color, done by a Black artist. You'd have to know. So implicit. So there's many of the works I study, and I look in I do about 3 galleries in London, and about 20 works in each gallery. And that's about 60 works. And many of them, probably about half, have no Black physical presence. We have to go looking for it. So that's it. So look, sorry, Daisha, I give you a very long answer to a short question. So I'm sorry about that. I got carried away. So just to recap, there's the Black presence. It's explicit. You can see it. Implicit. It's hidden. You have to be teased out. And at the same time, there's a journey from servants and slaves up to artists who are creating art in its own right. Sorry about that. I got carried away.
No, I think that's really important in terms of looking at how art kind of describes and details this journey that Black presence has not only had in terms of paintings and art, but has also had in just the idea of our archive as humans, right? When you look at the historical archive, you kind of can get this sense that, especially if you look at the early modern period, that Black presence is kind of peripheral or kind of on the sidelines. And that's reflected in the art. And it's interesting seeing kind of, which we're going to talk a lot about today, which is the then and now, and how then was reflected and how now is reflected, and how we see the differences in time, that temporal journey throughout time, I think is really important. And so I guess the second question I would ask is, a lot of the work you have to do has to do with kind of just documenting and presence. And I know that the second painting you have kind of details that in terms of, did I do the right one? Am I at the right slide?
No, in what sense? Well, if you complete your question.
In terms of how has Black art, particularly from the time periods that you study, what does it tell us about Black presence in Europe in particular? Yeah, I know. All these big questions.
Wow. Oh, wow. It's not a case of one size fits all. And that's part of the problem. you talk about these series at the Atlantic bridges, Atlantic connections. And one of the challenges I have when I do my tours, when my Black brothers and sisters from America come over, they immediately want to say, well, where's slavery? Where's slavery? And it's more subtle than that in art in Europe. It's more subtle. And myself, I find it very frustrating in the sense that in Britain, there was no slavery. There's no slave code. You know, there's no concept. You were free. Everyone was free in England. Yet in Europe, Spain, Germany, France, they had slave laws as code. Slave was a legal status. But what's so ironic about Britain? Britain wrote the most heinous slave codes. The Barbados slave code is one of the most dreadful in terms of the pain and ultimate death that slaves underwent if they went against this code, in terms of hands being cut off, feet being whipped. These are clearly defined. The acts were defined in law, written in law, and that law was written by English people. These very same people who, when they came back to England, didn't have no sense of law. So when you look at the Black presence in art, we don't see we don't have that legacy in Britain. This is in Britain and in turn it's art, that legacy of chattel, brutal, horrific chattel slavery that you have in America. What we have is a much more subtle version of it in terms of ownership and presence. And then I have to step back a bit and think about Europe, because we have to look in the early modern, let's talk about the 16th century, Britain was marginal in terms of the Black presence. You have to look at Italy, you have to look at Spain and Germany, to a lesser extent France. And even then it was different in terms of the Black presence, in terms of understanding Blackness. And in terms of Italian art, the Black presence was celebrated in terms of a Black presence was one of wealth and circumstance. That was part of your wealth. You had a Black slave, and you look at the elites; they would naturally have a Black servant in their portraits, just to show their wealth. They, just as you wear your finest clothing for the painting, they'd have their Black servant there to reflect their wealth and status. That's in Italy. In Germany, it was slightly different in terms of the Black presence signified internationalism, cosmopolitanism, as the Holy Roman Empire wanted to show that it was indeed an empire. So it ruled over many kingdoms, and those kingdoms included Black people. So the Black presence was part of, to literally big up the emperor, and that's reflected in the art and the presence that they have. And then in Spain, there's virtually zero Black presence because they were governed by the Moors, and there's a dreadful legacy of even to this day, there's a denial of a Black presence in Spain. Yet again, there's an irony, just as ironic as the as England and the slave code. Those slaves, most of the slaves that came into Europe came through Spain. In the 16th century, 17th century, Spain had a population of around 2 million Black people. 10% of some cities, Seville, were Black. Yet you will not find that in the paintings. They were not seen as precious objects. They were seen as purely as functional commercial objects, and they were treated as such. And that's reflected in the tales, the documentation that we have in terms of they were treated rather poorly and badly. They were not precious objects, unlike in Italy, when they were seen as precious. So when you talk about Blackness in the early modern, it's a complex picture. I'll finish on this in terms of there were Black saints celebrated in the Catholic Church, St. Maurice, and celebrated to this day. And there were Black ambassadors to the courts to English courts and to the Pope that came from Africa to look to wanting things from the Pope, or wanting to look for alliances. And there were Black elites, and principally the Alexandro Medici. He was a son of a slave, the son of a slave, who became the ruler of a republic in Florence, the Duke of Milan, Duke of Florence. So they were celebrated. So it's not a case of one size fits all. They were all slaves, move on. It's a more nuanced picture that changed across the various countries in Europe. Again, a long answer to your short question.
My huge questions. No, and I think that's really important, especially because you see that variety in all aspects. And so there is, in terms of trying to define Blackness, and this is something that's been kind of a through line throughout the entire series, is that you can't kind of put Blackness in one box, and that you have to see it in its various contexts. And that's especially true within the early modern period. But one thing I wanted to get at and kind of transition to is women, Black women. I've taken your tour and I've been able to see kind of how, particularly how Black women have been depicted in art, in those, in the Western canon, in Western canon art. So I don't know if you can speak to that in terms of how have Black women been portrayed?
Okay, could you just move on to just show the Andromeda picture? The Andromeda picture, okay. Now, I have to make an admission here. You know, my introduction to the Black presence in art was the Black Magus when I was doing my Open University degree. I found a Black man as king in early 16th century Devon. A Black king in early 16th century Devon. That just blew my mind. You know, these were people who were celebrating, revering a Black king as present. And that was my segue into the Black, to the point where I became an anorak on the Black Magus in terms of its cultural, social, political presence. And it was, when I was doing my tours of the National Gallery, it was pointed out to me, where are the women? And I'd never, you know, because when you see yourself, this is the so-called male gaze, life's good. You know, you're sorted. And it was a shock to me to realize that, well, where are the women in this period? And because there are Black women, significant Black women in this period. There's the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba, she came from Saba, or Sheba, which is kind of the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula, or the Horn of Africa, that area. So she was certainly dark, certainly Black. But there was a time she was Black in the 13th century. They portrayed her as Black. But that changed. She was never consistently portrayed as Black. She ended up being white and remains white to this day. That's the default image. Although at the time it was noted that there was text that the Black king came from Saba. The Black king in the adoration scene came from Saba, the same place as the Queen of Sheba. Now the Black king survived as a very enduring image. It's with us to this day. In fact, if you go to a Christmas market in Germany, you'll be able to buy little copies of the Black Magus. He's with us today. He's a symbol, a symbol that still endures, edifies, and builds up not just Black men, but men in general. But the Queen of Sheba disappears as a Black person and white, and even as white, she's marginal. But this is the figure I really want to talk about, the Black figure I want to talk about, is this. This is Andromeda here. This is Andromeda. And she, very similar to the Queen of Sheba, well, was Black and never made it out as white. Never made it out as Black. Let me tell you why. Andromeda was the daughter of the king and queen of Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia was the Greek for the land of burnt faces. So there's a prima facie case, and forgive the pun, for her to be Black. But what color is this figure here? This is Andromeda here with Perseus. She's shown as white. This is one of the first easel paintings of Andromeda. Now it's a text, whereas the Queen of Sheba comes from the Bible. This is a text from the classics, from Ovid's Roman classic epic poem called Metamorphosis. It's about change. And one of the stories he tells is about Andromeda. Her mother, who was the queen of I'll tell you very briefly, I'll tell you the story. Her mother, Andromeda's mother, claimed she was the most beautiful in the world. And that upset the sea gods, and the sea gods got annoyed. So they sent this animal here, Cetus, to come and eat the people of Ethiopia or harass them. And the king went to the oracle, and the oracle said, well, you're going to have to sacrifice your daughter. You have to give up your daughter. So here he is. She's got his daughter held up in chains and is about to be eaten by Cetus. Now, remember, this is an epic poem, an epic Roman poem. So it's a bit fantastical, so bear with me. Perseus, this is Perseus, he's flying back from having defeated Atlas, the giant Atlas, and turned them into the Atlas Mountains, because he's used because Perseus killed Medusa, and he took Medusa's head and turned the giant into a mountain, turned into stone in the mountain, and he's flying over Africa, and he sees Andromeda, and he falls in love with her, and so he says to Cephas, her father, "I'll kill Cetus, the monster, if I can marry your daughter." Yeah. So there we have Titian portrays him as killing killing Cetus, and they all live happily ever after because he marries Andromeda and they go and live happily ever after. But that is a fabricated story, because we know that people at the time knew that Andromeda was black, was dark-skinned. Ovid talks about her darkness, yet that the artist could not. And what's so annoying about this is that artists at the time wanted to be celebrated as men of letters, to be seen as important men, because many were put down because they worked with their hands and they were manual workers, and that was seen as not something, not good, not, men of letters didn't work with their hands, they worked with their minds, or they inherited their wealth. So, but artists want to be seen to be of that quality. So here's Titian and translating the classics, understanding them and translating them in his way. So he's been a man of letters, but not in written, but in pictorial, in the paintings. And they talked about poesy. They talked about poesy. These are poets. These are poems. These are pictorial poems. Just go back a bit. Just go back. Sorry.
Sorry.
Back. That's okay. These are poems. So this is a poem about translating on a par with the classics and his translation of it. But what's frustrating about this is that he portrays her as a black woman, as white, because beauty could not be, there seems to be in the artists were incapable of expressing beauty, black beauty, in art. If you just go forward to the next slide, I'm going to show you something very quick. It's not this slide. The next one. The next slide. Look, again. What is it? Is it there? No, you haven't. Oh, no. It's good. I didn't send it to you. We'll move on. Well, the slide I wanted to show you, and apologies for not showing it, there was, if you go from the 16th century to the 20th century, we have Andromeda as white in Clash of the Titans. Andromeda there in the 20th century, Perseus, the white Perseus, is rescuing the white Andromeda. This image is embedded in culture. And people say to me, well, Michael, why'd you go on about this? Well, this is how we, who we are. We can see in the walls of our galleries, how people see us. We can see us, society, not just black people, our society sees itself, can be seen on the walls of a gallery. So if you come back to the next slide, actually, this one's interesting. The next slide. Here we have a totally different interpretation of Andromeda and Perseus. Here we have, this is by Kamathi Donko, an artist of color. And he's painted, this is his wife as a muse. He has an Andromeda sitting calmly now. We'll come back to that calm in a moment. And there's Cetus in the background. We've got no heroic Perseus coming to help. This is a woman in control of her own faculties, ready to face her fate. Unlike this naked Andromeda. And what we have here is the quintessential damsel in distress. The distressed maiden needing literally a knight in shining armor. And she's often naked, where the knight is in shining armor to rescue her. And this kind of sexual, no the word for it, the sexual relationship between the naked Andromeda and that knight in shining armor. This is a pure fabrication. This is where the image comes about. So what Kimathi does, he debunks that. He says, we don't need the nonsense of the damsel in distress. She's been set up here to be eaten by this monster, and she's in charge of her fate. She's not screaming out for to be rescued. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing two things. I think this for me as a man and a black man is really important to me. And sorry to personalize it, but whenever I talk about it does become personal. Because the one hand, we're seeing the sexism of the woman needing a man to rescue her, the big man, she can't do it herself. And the racism of you can't have that beauty in the blackness. So the word I do describe this is really misogynoir, that dual whammy of racism and sexism coming together here. We see this, and we see it very clearly here in terms of this is a completely fabricated image. It's a translation where artists have created an image, but art reflects reality. So women need strong men. So so to come back to the black presence in my period in the Renaissance, I argue that they were actively eliminated, no question about it, in terms of artists would not accept the black presence, although wouldn't accept beauty in terms of the black figure. So it's essentially misogynoir, and it's something I feel quite emotional about, because, as I say, it took me a while to understand it, because I'd never noticed it. But I guess I'm sure you can see where I'm coming from. You understand. You've seen that trope of the damsel in distress, Daisha. You've seen it many times.
For sure. And I think it's really amazing, again, looking at art as an archive and how you can see a lot of continuities between the art archive and the written archive. When we look at figures such as the Dark Lady of Shakespeare's sonnets, the fact that modern day historians have such a hard time seeing this woman as a Black woman, let alone kind of like getting down into her, trying to figure out her exact personage. But in terms of seeing, this is Shakespeare says in his sonnets consistently over and over and over again, I say beauty is Black. She, her hair is dark. Her hair is like wires. He's obviously describing a Black woman in those sonnets. But for some reason, when she's imagined, there's kind of like, we can't picture that. We can't picture a Black woman being beautiful, and how, when we look back at the historical archive, how these figures just disappear, similar to Andromeda just becoming a white woman, just kind of disappearing. We see the same thing with figures such as Cleopatra, Nefertiti. We can't visualize Black women in that light. And so it's easier to either kind of distort them to fit what our ideas around beauty should be, or just erase them completely from the record.
No, for me, that's so. What's so terrible about that is these images persist. It's drip to the ages, to the decades. So the default, and you get to the point where, and let me be upfront, when you see Black kids, when they talk, little children, with their idea of beauty is the white doll with the blonde hair. They cannot, because it's ingrained into us. Because those are the images daily, day in, day out. And that's why it's great what's happening now. We're celebrating Blackness. We're celebrating Blackness actively. And it has to be done. Because if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. I'll give you an example. I'll show you Do you want another slide here? Just the next slide. This, we all know this image. You know, God is an old white man, yeah? And Adam is a young man. Go to the next page. The next page. The next slide. This is Harmonia Roselle's. People went mad when they saw this. They went, this is appropriation. You're hijacking our image. And you have to calm down and say, well, who said God couldn't be a black woman? Because our mind has been so immersed in that image of the whiteness of God. When we see it, and even I'm, you have to stand back and then and embrace it. But some people cannot embrace it, and that's what I rail against. And that's what art can do. Art can challenge you, because you've accepted all these tropes over the years, over the decades. You've almost took with your mother's milk. This is the default image of God, the default image of Jesus, of Adam. This is how he looked. Because we live in an age when the painting, the image is all that we can't. We sometimes fail to stand back and say, well, somebody made this image, and 9 times out of 10 it was a man. And then it comes back to the problem I had in terms of, I saw the Black King, and I'm happy. So men create men in God in their own image. He looks like me. And this is why it's so important, the kind of things you're doing, the dialogue you're having. You're kind of challenging this and just disrupting the narrative and making people think about it. Now, some people don't want to think about it. These images are set in stone. You're taking over some fact. It's a case of, for me, and again, I'm a bit emotional about this, it's a failure of imagination. Because one of my friends did some work, and they posted some images of Black people over the ages in various, Black people in the Crusades, Black people in Georgian times, Black people in Victorian times. And it says, you have no history, you have to make it up. You have no history, you have to make it up. Deep breath. How did we get here? We didn't just magically appear. So their imagination is so limited. Well, couldn't understand, well, you're here, so how do you get here? There's a backstory. We all have a backstory. How back the story goes back, how far back goes back is up for you to work out, and for us to work out. It's that inability, and that's my frustration with many people who challenge this kind of portrayal, where you get many Black artists now who are looking into the canonical paintings and owning them. And then you can't own them, they're ours. Well, who is our and who is you? I love Obama's word, history is messy. If you embrace messiness, then you're embracing history, because it's not pure and wonderful. It's full of wonderful things like this, like a black god. Get over it. Calm down. So this is my thing about the imagination, and coming back to this, the white Andromeda, or the black Andromeda, embracing it. You have to. Just to finish on the Andromeda from my point, the challenge with Andromeda now, because the default is white, if we try and make Andromeda black, we're accused now of, hang on a sec, you're appropriating an image. And that's where it makes it really difficult. But nevertheless, we should challenge these things. I believe we should challenge these things in terms of Black people have been around, and we have a presence, very much a presence, certainly in the early modern, and we were there. And as such, we should be celebrated.
For sure. And like I said, and I think that's evident. And it is interesting, kind of this pushback against not even necessarily reclaiming, but restoring these figures to their proper place in the historical record. When we see, again, I'm kind of harping on the Dark Lady, just because I did some work in looking at, if for those who are in the audience or who are going to be listening on the rebroadcast, Carolyn Randall Williams, her work, Lucy Negro Redu, her reconstructing this Dark Lady figure, who's very, very, it's very clear. I recommend that if anyone who hasn't read the Dark Lady Sonnets, that you read them. It's very clear he's talking about a Black woman. But there's this reluctance to acknowledge her as a Black woman. One, because it challenges our notions of beauty. If this man of kind of trying to, if Shakespeare is who he says he is, if Shakespeare is this authoritative figure in the historical record, how is he saying that Black is beautiful? Because there's no way to kind of resolve that. And it becomes messy. So it's easier for people to just say, okay, well, she had to have been white. I've seen, if you read the sonnets and you see the historiography following of people trying to apply personage to her, people have said this woman who he describes as being dark skinned, her skin is dun, her hair is wiry. People have applied and said, okay, well, that has to be Elizabeth I. It has to be. He has to be describing Elizabeth I when it's quite obvious he's describing a Black woman. But I think it kind of gets at how does art challenge that? And what space does, what authority does art have to kind of like shape our notions of our own past and to make it messy?
You know, for me, that's what art is all about. And that's why I think, because my first degree was physics. And I thought physics is everything. It is 99% of everything. I'll right now. There's a 1% no, long story. I'm being flippant. One of the things that this journey has taught me, and I had a brilliant lecture from Martha Nussbaum. You know, if you're familiar with Martha Nussbaum, she's a philosopher in education. She's a brilliant woman, and she was talking about and it's the humanities. The humanities are under attack now. They want to cut them down in universities. People want to spend more money on the so-called STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. You know, my subjects, the physics subjects, that's where the money is. But she's arguing, no, the humanities are really important. And she's really convinced me that the humanities are important for what you just talked about, that having that imagination to accept messiness. She talks about the humanities give us three things, I think, which are really important for defining who we are and how we fit into the world. The first thing, it gives us a worldview. You know, there's something else out there other than us, other than me. You know, there's other religions, other societies, other histories. You look at other people. It's not just about you. And at the same time, it gives you critical thinking. That ability to kind of, just as you analyze that Shakespeare text, you look at it, try to understand it, and think about it. You know, does it make sense? What if, why not? You go in an intellectual journey, thought experiments. You try and make it work, or not make it work accordingly, but at least you try. You have that ability to have your worldview, because what happens is your worldview is being challenged. There were no Black people in Shakespeare's time, so period. You know, that sonnet doesn't work. Hang on a sec. And this is where the last of the three comes in here. She talks about imagination. It gets you to think. And my epiphany was in imagination when I realized that this is not just about the humanities, it's about science as well. Because Einstein had thought experiments. And one of his thought experiments was, what's it like to sit on a light wave? You know, he had his imagination to go on that journey. Now, even now, I can't get my head around that. You know, the consequence in terms of mass, velocity, time. I just can't understand it. But he went on that journey. So it's having that imagination, not just to think, well, that Black woman didn't exist. It was Elizabeth I or whatever. Just eliminating the Black presence, not having that intellectual curiosity with your critical thinking and your worldview, but with the imagination at work to see, well, how could she have got here? Where did she come from? You know, just exercise your mind, go on that journey. So that's where I think, and I'm moved away from physics being the all. I think that humanity's thinking in terms of having a worldview and having that worldview challenged and thinking about it critically and having the imagination to go on the journey. That's so important. And it saddens me when you see these people look at this painting by Hamona Rosselsi and say, God could never have been a Black woman. Calm down. That, what evidence do you have to say God wasn't a woman? What evidence do you have to say he's a man? So that's why I think it's this idea of embracing messiness with your imagination, with your worldview, and more importantly, just your imagination, just letting your mind go on a journey. Now, let me just finish on this. Great art is produced on that process, critical thinking, worldview being challenged, and imagination. Some people's imagination is bonkers. I say, well, that's your bonkers. I respect you. You believe in it. We'll go on the journey with you, and that's what art is about. It's about all. Big statement. I think it's true. All great art is produced in that kind of triumphant of worldview being challenged, with your critical thinking. How far can I push this idea? With your imagination, they riff off each other to create something, and you know when to stop when you've gone too far. Like, as I say, some people don't know when to stop. They're gone forever. Other people are quite content. So that's why I think this embracing messiness in art is so important. It's not just for Blackness, but it's art in general in terms of embracing who you are and how you fit into the world. So again, a very long answer to a short question there. A comment. Apologies.
No, of course. I think, and like I said, I think this is really important in terms of this is a very pertinent conversation, and that art is not only about reimagining. When we look at Black presence or we talk about Blackness, it's not only about reimagining Blackness, it's about reimagining the world around Blackness, the world that has constructed Blackness. And I think those are important things to kind of remember. And I know you have one last image.
Oh goodness! This image kind of sums up, coming back to the women in art. When we were doing this image, when I studied this at one of them art history, this is a very famous, one of the most famous paintings of the Impressionists, Manet's Olympia. And I remember when we studied this, because this is his response to a painting by Titian called Danae. And she's looking straight at us. She's confident. She's arrogant. She's a prostitute, but she's in control of the faculty. She's in control as a woman asserting herself. And we'd spend more talking about the cat. I don't know if you can see, there's a cat here. There's a black cat with its tail up, and the sexual significance of that tail and the flowers. We've very, very rarely talked about the Black woman. But what's happening now is we live in different times now, and Black women are being celebrated. There's a lot of work being done on the Black figure, and there was a brilliant exhibition a couple of years or so ago, and they brought this figure to life. And it's here. Let me just go to the next slide. You show the next slide here. Oops. There she is. It was originally called La Negresse by Edward Manet. Her name was Laura. We know who she was, but Manet chose to call her the Negress. And so often art, after we're talking about from the 18th century, 19th century onwards, that there were Black women in art, but we didn't know who they were. They were the Negress, the Black woman, the slave,
the dark lady.
Exactly. They had no identity. And what's happening now is there's names come to Denise Morel. Her PhD was on Black women in Impressionism, and she's rediscovered these people. She's backfilling, giving them stories. And this painting was renamed Portrait of Laura for the exhibition. So she actually gave her the presence. I think it's really important that the art historians are now going back and giving these Black women names. We know who they are. So let's celebrate them. I think that's very powerful in the sense that it's taking ownership, but it even goes further today, because I think a lot of female artists, a lot of Black women artists are celebrating Black women. Like you saw the Rossells, Harmonia Rossells, that is typical of what Black women are doing. If they're not being celebrated in art for themselves, who they are, they physically celebrate themselves. You know, there's did I show you the picture? Did I send you this? Apologies if I go to the next slide. There it is. Yeah, that's it. These are what's happening today is one of celebration, where you've got people like let me just move myself out the way here. This is Lubaima Himid, the first Black woman to win the Turner Prize here in Britain. We've got Phoebe Boswell, a rising star in the art world. Here's my own partner, Evan Colvin. She's an artist. I have to put her here. If she didn't, she'd be mad at me, but she's there. There's Barbara Walker. She's doing some great murals. If you go in some of the high-tech offices around London, she's doing some great work on the walls there. And there's Volda Jackson, Charmaine Watkins. What unites them, apart from being Black women, is not, this is the mission I have to make, and I can't show you in this small space, but these are women not just celebrating themselves, but celebrating themselves big style. These are all physically big drawings and paintings. These are not modest, domestic sized pieces. These are pieces which, you have to fit. These are ambitious sized paintings, most life-size paintings of themselves and images, which will reflect the fact that they're not going to be held back. Nothing is holding them back. So they really celebrate them. They're really celebrating themselves now. And I talk about this when I we talk about Black women art in terms of how we went from that, where they were eliminated in my period. When I say my period, the Renaissance, that's the period I study mostly. And we moved forward into time, how they were anonymized, and then images are being reclaimed, like I've just showed you with Laura there in the Impressionism, and today they're celebrating. So in some ways, it's a bit, I'm going to say, challenging to me to Black artists, Black female artists, because they're very feisty and full of themselves because they know who they are. They're not, and they don't pull any punches in terms of defining who they are and how they fit into the world, which I think is fantastic for me in terms of when you look at the journey the Black female figure has been on, and how, to a large extent, it's been ignored or denigrated, and now it's literally women doing it for themselves. I think for me, that is one of the most exciting things about Blackness in art today: the power and presence of Black women. Not to say there are many Black male artists, respect to it, but no, there's Black women artists defining who they are and how society works for and against them. So there's too many for me to mention, but I would say they know who they are. So it's an important area.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I'll move on to my quick portraits that I wanted to share, and kind of tidbits I wanted to add towards the end, which is this is probably one of my favorite portraits or paintings ever. It's something that consistently, every time I think about it, it makes me drift off into different thoughts, which is Titus Kafar's work, Drawing the Blind. And I'm going to skip past this one to get to his work, Beyond the Myth of Benevolence. And if you look on the screen here, you have the traditional portrait of Thomas Jefferson. And then you kind of have it scrolled back to display this image of Sally Hemings. And I think it's such a powerful photo in terms of not only repositioning, and this is something that I see a lot in not only Titus's work, but also other artworks, in terms of its ability to re-challenge accepted historical quote unquote truths. The fact that we're not only repositioning Sally Hemings back into the centerfold, but Thomas Jefferson himself has to change. He is challenged, right? Because you have this man who people see, okay, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He's this philosopher, he's this wonderful, wise thinker. But he not only wrote the Declaration of Independence, he also was a leading writer on race. And his work on race, of defining Blackness, of defining Black womanhood, saying that we didn't, they're stinky, they're lazy, the things that he says in his notes on the South. it's interesting how this painting has an ability to kind of challenge the historical record by placing her back there. And also the fact that we know by the historical record that Sally Hemings was more than likely a light-skinned woman. Mm. But to reposition a dark-skinned woman here is a powerful statement. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I find this a powerful, powerful image. Because in some ways, it's a very simple message. Behind every great man, there's a great woman. But hang on a sec. This is not the great woman I'm expecting. This is not what, you know, but who is she? You know, when he talks about Sally Hemings as his mistress. As his mistress. Hello? This is the man she was his slave. So it challenges the acceptive narrative in terms of him, the austere white man who wrote the Constitution. What a leading figure of cultural, social society is. But then, hang on a sec, who's behind him? Who helped him make that happen? Who helped him make that happen? And you know, you made that point about Sally Hemings being light-skinned. And shame on me, I can't remember the girl's name. But she wrote a piece in the New York Times earlier this week, and the opening sentences, and you may be able to help me. It says, "I am rape-colored."
Yes, Carolyn Randall Williams. Yes,
you know, I am rape-colored. Man, that just, you know, there's a PhD in that, unpicking that phrase, and she goes on to talk about here being a monument. A monument to the Confederacy. If you want to look at me, don't look at that flag, look at me. And it's the same way you have here. You know, this image, and in some ways, this is a very disarming image. Just as the Harmony Ourselves has God as a black woman, it challenges our accepted beliefs and understanding. And this is what I talk about, you know, I've said this before, WTF art. You know, what the art that arrests you and makes you challenge you. And in some ways, you don't want to talk about this because it's too, some of them find it too difficult. You know, this is too, let's move on here. Where that imagination fails and we just want to move on. But yeah, I think it's one incredibly powerful. And it touches on something I found really difficult to talk about. This colorism. This, you know, the fact that there's light skin as opposed to dark skin and the consequences of it and the meanings of that. It really is a challenging picture from that point of view in terms of addressing not just white people, but in terms of we as Black people, how we accept each other, how we relate to each other. And I find it, personally, I always find it a difficult conversation to have in terms of colorism, in terms of how it fits in one over the other. You know, only just today we had this Nina Simone thing, the woman who wants to play Nina Simone, and she regrets it. And that was extreme, where she was a Black woman who made herself blacker and adjusted her nose. You know, these are challenging things. You know, when you think about, why would you want to do that it's almost a caricature of a black woman, black facing to play another Black woman. So it's challenging. So Titus really kind of, it gives us much food for thought in terms of his understanding of Jefferson. And for me, as I say, this question of colorism is really, really something that we as Black people really get sorted, really get, you know, there's this one drop business and kind of move on rather than kind of seeing it as a point of division in terms of betterness, or I'm better than him because I'm lighter than him. It doesn't help anybody. That's my opinion. So this is one of my favorite Titus's work. It's a beautiful piece of work.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, and I think in particular, again, not only about repositioning a dark-skinned Black woman to the centerfold, to the center of the painting, where you can't dodge away from her. You can't turn to the page where he says all men were created equal. You have to kind of feast your eyes on her. And again, I think, looking at her is kind of a symbol of what the legacy of race is, particularly in the States, but across the globe. And again, looking at how art causes us to reimagine notions of Blackness, reimagine notions of whiteness, because whiteness is challenged here, the idea of whiteness, and the fact that Blackness and whiteness on one hand are fake, they're not true. Race is socially constructed, but they carry real value. And so being able to kind of balance that in an image, I think is really important. And I guess the last piece that I wanted to talk about, kind of talking about big trends. I know we mentioned Caroline Randall Williams and her piece that she did in the New York Times about her legacy. I had a chance to interview her in December. She's a wonderful writer, and it's just an amazing, who causes you to think. She's the person who wrote Lucy Negro Redu, about the Dark Lady, which I encourage everyone to read in order. And we talked about Zoe Saldana and the controversy around her playing Nina Turner. But another kind of discussion that we're starting to have is this conversation on how do we envision or imagine Africa visually? And I know that we kind of had this conversation. It's a little bit controversial, which I hope to get into next week when we have our Bridging the Atlantic series next week with our panel discussion, which is Africa Black? Because whenever we talk about Blackness, we're very, very wide, we're very broad. We say Black, and it kind of, for some reason, encompasses all these different nationalities, all these different ethnicities. But for some reason, when we talk about Africa, it's very, for some reason, there's a certain imagery that comes there of whether or not when we talk about Africa, are our notions real? And so I kind of wanted to talk about that as a piece. I'm hoping that people may have questions or thoughts or comments. For those who are listening either on YouTube or on Facebook or in the live session, please feel free to comment on what your thoughts would have been about how Beyonce visualizes Blackness. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people are kind of associating her kind of like journey into kind of like associating or imagining Africa to this now. She's been doing this for quite some time. She envisioned or channeled Oshun as early, at an award ceremony, or Oshun being an Orisha of the Yoruba tradition. So this is a journey that she's been on for quite some time in terms of trying to reimagine Africa as a place of wealth, as a place of story. And we saw that again with Black Panther. And I wanted to kind of throw that out there to the audience just to see if anyone had any things that they wanted to talk back to or mention in terms of what their thoughts are on us reimagining Africa, particularly when it's done in the diaspora, not from the continent, if that makes sense. And I don't know if, Michael, you have some thoughts on this. I know we were talking about it before.
You know, I'm challenged by this on two fronts. The first front, can an African be Black? This idea of Black Africa. Now, come back to your point about whiteness and Blackness. Those are the things of the West that we hear in Europe and America. Africa doesn't need Blackness. Africa is Black. They are Black, but so it's a different group. And then the second thing is the mythologizing of the Wakanda of Africa. When I think it's great on the one hand. You should there is a bigger Africa here, but beyond the malnutrition and all those dreadful pictures of starving babies and wars and corruption, there is an Africa. The universities, some of the digital departments, some of the universities in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, they're producing some fantastic designs, digital designs. They're producing new technology. They're creating a new world. They are. It's just the Wakanda, maybe they're just going just that little bit too far. Maybe this is me being a bit over the top here, a bit too far. So, but I commend, but on the one hand, I do commend Beyonce, and I did the point that she's doing the Lion King here, and she has them as people, as human beings, not Africa as animals. So I respect her for that. But in terms of, this Wakanda Africa, I respect to it, but at the same time, let's keep our feet on the ground. There's universities there, there's cities there which are doing things today, creating great ideas and great wealth. And great things are happening in Africa, which are real, not quite fantasy. And that's the point I was making. Yeah? So in terms of that fantastical side, the mythologizing of it, rather than let's get real.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I think we've been talking a lot about the idea of imagination, right? And how do we imagine things? And it's interesting. I wrote a paper in October about how, and again, this is not to kind of make a broad generalization because everyone feels differently, but I do think that there is a part when we think about the Pan-African dream, or we think about what modernity looks like for Black people, right? Because I think when you think about European notions of modernity, we think a lot about an acceleration forward, right? But I think when we think about Black modernity, or what Black utopias or Pan-African utopias have been imagined of, there's always an element of the past. And an element of the past that's been taken and erased. And I think that that's something that I took away with Black is King in terms of what Africa does symbolize for people of the diaspora. And I do think I do think on one hand, people can say it's, I do definitely think that in some ways, those notions are not accurate, and that people who can think they're, just phantasmic. But I also think that it comes from a specific place. And I think it's important. And I also want to highlight the fact that she also gave a platform to a lot of African artists and people who are African artists, and a lot of African, there was a lot of research that went behind it too. So it isn't completely out of nowhere, but I definitely think that in terms of how it's ingested by people of the diaspora is an important conversation to have. And I can see some people in the comments kind of saying that sometimes the reimagining can be a form of erasure, of not really seeing the cultures for who they are. And some of that kind of comes down into contact, and I'm just speaking on this as an African-American. Whenever I was younger, and I'm not sure if there's any other African-Americans in the audience who can speak to this, my only visions of Africa were those commercials that came on at 2:00 in the morning of starving children, of just depraved, like there's nothing there, right? And that imagery is that imagery is damaging, right? And I think that when we have things like Black is King, when we have things like Black Panther, in terms of visualizing something different, that is important. I will say I'm also a high school history teacher, and when Black Panther came out, I had one student write on his desk, "Africa forever." That did something for him, of being able to replace Africa in a completely, entirely new context. And so I think it's important for us when we're having these conversations about how we visualize Blackness, how we visualize a Black future, right? And kind of, I would love to do a session on Afrofuturism and what that means.
But Daisha, I know time's not against us here, we're running out of time, but look, deep breath. When people say Africa, we're talking about 500 million people.
Yes.
We're talking about 54 countries. We're talking about a huge range in weather conditions, in terms of crop conditions and growing conditions. Not one size fits all. Not one size fits all. So when we do that, when we talk about Africa, we're sometimes playing into the white man's hands, in terms of there is this thing called Africa. And I would, let me challenge you now, where is Africa? Who is Africa?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is for sure true. That is.
If I look at my own town, Nigeria, where I come from, my heritage, there's 250 tribes, 250 different cultures, 250 ways of describing life in their language, 250 ways of seeing the world, just in that one small country. So that one size fits all. It's
problematic. And I think in particular, because that was a critique that came out with Black Panther, and I know that it comes out here, is the fact that I know that Arike, you're saying you're kind of recognizing about the different textures, and is whenever, and again, I am recognizing that there are multiple countries, when it is visualized, it all kind of is put into different, okay, we're just going to pull from here, and we're going to pull from this tribe, we're going to pull from the Igbo, we're going to pull from the Yoruba, we're going to pull from Ghana. There is a kind of a meshing together, which I think would be interesting in terms of what is that effective? Because again, who are we speaking to? Are we speaking to the diaspora? Or are we speaking to the continent?
But it's a case of, you know, 1 in 4 Africans is a Nigerian. So Nigerians, they're going to speak the biggest, you know. The Nigerians speak for Africa. But remember, Nigeria, there's 250 languages. So it's, you know, it's which Nigeria you're talking about, the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Isha, you know, it's difficult. But at the same time, you know, and this is where it gets this idea of blackness and what unites us, what keeps us together, what keeps diaspora together. You know, so is it? I think the point Enrique makes are really well pointed, because it's almost like a pick and mix Africa.
Yes.
You know, there's a South Africa, there's an East Africa, and in East Africa there's Tanzania, there's Kenya. You know, the difference, and it's you know, it's
being able to kind of like, again, when we think about context and how that gets applied, it's important that we look at the different contexts, and also just looking at the fact that it's different. But that's what I think is interesting in that, and I guess it's the last point I wanted to make in terms of when we ask the question, can Africa be Black? Black is a transitional term, right? When we look at, and we talked about this with during the talk with Soledadzi, I imagine us talking about it later. Black is a transitional term. It's a terminology, to me, as at least how I define it, of moving into the other, right? It's a term for the other. And in many ways, we've reclaimed that word, and our usage of the word is there to either unify, but Black can't see difference. Oftentimes, when we think about it, right? When we really think about it, when you're talking about Black people, what are you talking about, right? Are you talking about African Americans? Are you talking about Jamaicans? Are you talking about Trinidadians, right? Black kind of leaves no room for that. And so I think when we think about Africa, it kind of visualizes it through those lenses of one entity. And I think that kind of complicates our notions of Blackness and our definitions of Blackness, because it leaves no room for difference. The same thing can be applied to whiteness, right? When we first started talking, when we were saying, what is Black presence in Europe? Well, where in Europe? Are you talking about Austria? Are you talking about Italy? These terms leave no room for wiggles. They leave no room for context. And so when we think about our usage of the term in the modern day, I think it's important. That's my last tangent.
Daisha, I think it comes back to this messiness. You know, Italy, Austria, Germany, Britain, there's a different Black presence in all of them. It's slightly different, yeah? It's not the same, not one size fits all. You know, so it's trying to understanding them. There's been a couple of comments that I see about my own tours. Do I still do my tours? Can I just do a little advert for myself, Daisha, can I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I don't do the tours anymore because you're not allowed because of the COVID pandemic. And it will not happen for probably another year in the gallery. But my tours are online, and you can see, you see some, you can come to some of the webinars online, and you can sample them. I'm going to put the link in the chat group here. I'll put the link here. You can check me out there. I'd love to see some of you on my tours. It'd be great to have you on to talk about, because I like my tours. I like to see them as conversations, because art it's a work in progress. It's all about interpretation. There is HTTP, the image. I put it in the image of the Black, and it's called http bit.ly/the_IBLG. The image of the Black in London galleries. If you Google me, Michael Ohajura, or image of the Black in London galleries, you'll find me. And I'd love to see on some of the tours, and when we talk about these things, because it's an interpretation. It's all a work in progress, and it's very relevant today. Because how we see ourselves as Black people and white people, you can see on the walls of the galleries. And particularly, I've got this thing about women and Black women, how their images have been managed, manipulated over the decades, over the centuries, and now they're being taken back. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
No. And I like I said, I've been on the tours. I definitely think they're a wonderful way of like thinking about these kind of questions. I definitely recommend. And you can also find Not only you'll be able to find Michael's work, and as well as the different paintings that a list of the paintings that we referenced. For those who are going to be listening to this on the rebroadcast on Decolonize in the Archive, we'll be able to access and have the names of the paintings on the Bridging the Atlantic website that I will post.
What was the name of the philosopher? Oh, it's Martha. Oops, hang on a sec. It's Martha Nussbaum. That's it. Oh, there's no G. Martha Nussbaum. Yeah. I've just written. I've written a chapter in a book about her, and I'll send you. If you, I've got a reading list. Let me just. If I go to my, you'll find her in my reading list. Here's my reading of. If you're interested in Black art, there's a reading list I can share with you. IBLG_reading. And there, if you go there, you'll see there's a book that I'm part of. Just give me a second. I'll go and get. I can't remember the title of my own book. This is embarrassing. Just a second. Just a second.
And I guess in the meantime, if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to say, either on the Facebook page, on Instagram, not Instagram, Twitter, if there's any questions or comments that you might have from the talk, or if you just want to kind of share out your takeaways from the conversation, please feel free to do that in the chat and I'll be able to see it.
Sorry about that. Here it is. It's called Britain's Black Past. There's a chapter in there which describes what I've just talked about, Britain's Black Past, and it's edited by Gretchen Gerzina. I can't spell Gretchen. Just a second. I spell Brit. Oops, I can't spell Britain. My spelling isn't Britain's Black Past. There is that. Yeah. There's that in that book. I have a chapter that I talk about the things I've discussed on here, and there's also other chapters on Black British history. It's a great book. I would say that, wouldn't I?
And I see a question from my friend Victoria. So she.
I have a follow-up question. How much do you think class contributes to the fortunes of Black women as white? I'm reminded of the Greek Black figures of Memnon. In these, but they are sometimes white, whereas their servants are clearly Black. Okay, well, this is where I'm going to use the historian's phrase, which is almost a get-out phrase. Not my period. In terms of the Greek vases and in terms of the Black figure, there's different interpretations of them, and it's an area that I've kind of this is, how can I say, I've not shied away from, because there's so many different interpretations of Memnon and those figures as you quite rightly talk about there in terms of class, so I can't give you a smooth answer in terms of relationships, in terms of class and power from that period. In my period in Renaissance, it's clear there's a class difference, in terms of the relationship between the so-called servants and slaves. But equally, when there were elites, and there were elites in the Spanish court and in the ambassadors of the Pope, the blacks, those elites, those ambassadors, those princes, those kings, they were, I say there was no kings who visit Europe in my period, but there were many elites. They were respected and seen as equals. They weren't disparaged. They weren't seen as lower kind of people. But at the same time, there's a very famous exchange between an English cardinal. He went to Rome. This was at the time of the Reformation, and he wanted to speak to the Pope, and the Pope didn't treat him too well, because this is the time when the English church was breaking up because of the Reformation, Henry VIII. And then this English cardinal, in a letter to a Spanish cardinal, says the Pope treated him like a black. And from that, we infer that there was a class structure in terms of blacks were treated less, even in the Catholic Church, which is less than others. So I can't give you a clear answer to the Greek vases, but class did play a part, was a part in, say, the black presence certainly in the early modern period. Did that help? Did that answer your question, Victoria? Let me know, and I'll go and do more research if it didn't. Oh, someone's put a link up to the book. Thank you for that. Oh no, thank you. Okay, great. I'm glad it did. I'm glad it did.
So does anyone have any other questions? You don't only have to have a question. If you wanted to just say a comment on kind of like what you thought from the talk at all, you're welcome to do that as well in the chat. Leave people some room to type, I think. Well, I've definitely enjoyed the talk.
Well, can I give them a question then? No question this way. In terms of black artists reinventing or taking over classical paintings, do you think that is a good thing to do, or should they create their own images? So should they appropriate, or should they create their own images?
I'm really interested to hear what people think about this. Yeah. So Rike, she thinks both, which I agree with. I think both.
No, because it's about, because for me, I asked the question so I can answer it. Because art is about vocabulary. There's verbs, there's nouns. So when people look at a painting, they've got a visual interpretation. There's a visual vocabulary. They're deconstructing them. So if there's an accepted vocabulary, rather than reinvent your own, which you can do, you look at someone like, oh God, his name's gone from me. He was a contemporary with. In the mind, it's when you get old, the mind goes blank. He was a contemporary of Andy Warhol, a black artist, a young black artist whose name escapes me. He created his own vocabulary. Does anyone? Oh, this is embarrassing. But he created it. Basque with thank you, guys. Oh my God, I've got some fans out there. Thank you so much. Basque created his own vocabulary for his art. So so total respect for him that he could do that. So in the same, but equally, when you look at Harmonia Rosel's, she's taking established pictures and owning them. And I think, maybe I'm arguing for both actually. You do need to create your own, but own the other pictures. So I guess I'm with you in that respect. Actually, I didn't fully expect me to come down to. I'm gonna really think it through. You're right. You need to have both.
Yeah, and I think what Sarah's saying, when she said when so much erasure has taken place, then you have to begin the work of restoration and reinvention. I think that's an important place to start, is the fact that we are kind of coming from a place in which so much of the past has been erased, or just kind of like just lied about. Like that's another piece. So when people talk about appropriation, kind of like, oh yeah, well, Black people are appropriating these historically Western art paintings. They've already been appropriated already. So
African mythology.
Yeah.
In addition to, wow, that's there's I know some sculpture friends of mine are trying to do these Yoruba myths in sculpture and creating some really fantastic work. And it's happening. It's happening. I guess it's not celebrated enough in terms of it's difficult to go. There's only some. Yeah, it's hard to get these messages out internationally, but they are doing some work out there in this area.
And I will say, I feel as though a lot of what I guess you would consider to be African mythology, and I don't really necessarily even consider it mythology, but when you look at the channeling of these Yoruba orishas, I think it's important for people to recognize that people still practice that today. But that is probably, I don't know, that's been the main form that I've seen.
Oh, can I just pick just before I'm going to stop here because you're asking some great questions here. This is from, would be nice to see more African mythology in addition to Greek or Roman or even Egyptian. There's a man called Martin Bonnell. Have you ever heard of Martin Bonnell? And he has a theory called Black Athena. Bonnell. Black Athena. And what there is that, okay, you can look it up, Black Athena. What it is, it talks about, the art I've talked about starts classically at Greece and moves forward. It's always magically that everything, all the philosophy, art, culture started with the Greeks and moved forward. It pays no cognizance to the Phoenicians, to the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all those civilizations that went before. And what Martin Bonnell does, he brings that together and says, look, it's not as simple as that. And he looks at languages and other things to kind of, to show how the Greeks didn't do it on their own, despite what a lot of historians will have you believe. And it's the fact that they're interconnected. I take a very simplistic view of this. The Mediterranean was the highway, the trading highway of its day. It goes back centuries. So once you start trading with people, not just goods change, but ideas, food, that changed. Those ideas exchange, because history is what you, what they say? It's what you eat, what you speak, and what you wear. Those things, they're informed by so many other things. So that's what Black Athena addresses, that internationality, not just the pure Greekness and that Greeks to the Romans and on to us. It's more nuanced than that. The Egyptians were clearly involved, the Babylonians, Kush, the Hindu of Kush, these were people below the Egyptians as a parallel empire. But they were influential. So it's seeing the whole of all of these civilizations coming together to bring us today. So it's really important that we don't just take that single narrative of Greece and its whiteness and that's it. You know, it's much more subtle than that, much more subtle. And Black Athena is a great place to start. If you come on one of my tours, we talk much more about this. But I'll stop there. I'm going on.
And I will say we are reaching our time, but I will save the chat. So if you have asked questions, I'll make sure to forward them on to Michael after, and you can and you'll be able to find the answers on the Bridging the Atlantic website sometime next week, as well as the debrief. But really, really briefly, if everyone who's on the chat right now, who's logged into the Zoom session, I'm actually going to insert in a survey that I would love for you all to complete. It'll let us know kind of how you took away, what you took away from the event today, where you logged in from. And also make sure to keep in mind that we have our last Bridging the Atlantic Thursday event next Thursday, where we're gonna have a panel discussion of a lot of different representation from the diaspora, getting together and kind of talking about Blackness, I guess, is just to put it simply. Please make sure that you complete the survey. If anyone has any last words, and make sure to check out Michael's tours. I'm telling you, it's such a treat. You really have to. And please follow his work, as well as the Black Cultural Archives, of course. Okay.
Can I say, guys, I've really enjoyed this. And I'm sorry if I ranted on a little bit. I did get carried away at times, because this is my passion. I love this stuff and I love sharing it. You guys have been great. Some of those questions, I'm going to take them down. There's some PhDs in those questions. There are some great ones. So thank you so much, Indy. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will see you all next Thursday. Make sure to register. Yeah, and we'll see you next on Bridging the Atlantic.
Whoop, whoop. Here's now, guys. Bye.